Support for this episode of Trifles is brought to you by the Baker Street Journal, the leading publication of Sherlockian scholarship since 1946. Find them online at bakerstreetirregulars.com. Welcome to Trifles, a weekly podcast about the Sherlock Holmes stories.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Yes, the band was speckled and there were 6 Napoleons, but there are so many other details to pick apart in the stories.
Pray, be precise as to details.
You know the plots, but what about the minutiae? Have you ever stopped to wonder about why Dr. Watson was called James by his wife? Or of Sherlock Holmes's dining habits? Or what happened when he let a criminal escape?
You are very inquisitive, Mr. Holmes.
It is my business to know what other people don't know.
Scott Monty and Burt Wolder will have the answers to these questions and more in Trifles.
The game's afoot.
Episode 257, Damsels in Distress. Well, hello there, and welcome to Trifles, the Sherlock Holmes podcast where we look at some of the details in the Sherlock Holmes stories. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Burt Wolder.
And Burt, are you distressed today? Are you feeling particularly piqued?
No, I'm not distressed. I'm just slightly pockmarked.
Well, a little cream from the Sherlock Holmes brand face cream will get you feeling right as rain.
Friends, did you wake up with a complexion that was as rough as Baker Street on a rainy morning? That's why you need the new Baron Gruner brand face healer. Friends, are you concerned that some person you may have treated poorly in a prior life may suddenly sneak out behind the curtains and hurl vitriol in your face? That's why you can never be too careful. That's why you need Sherlock Holmes brand face cream.
Yes, smooth over all your problems, facial or otherwise, with the Sherlock Holmes brand face cream. Available today at your local chemist.
Ah, yes. Wow. Just be sure to sign the poison book when you...
Well, we are not here to advertise face cream or any other kind of cream for that matter. We are here to discuss another element of the Sherlock Holmes stories that we call trifles. The show notes for this show are available at ihose.co/trifles257, all lowercase. That'll get you to the SherlockHolmesPodcast.com website, where you can find all the back episodes, all the archives, 5 seasons worth now. You can go through those and find whatever episode delights your particular fancy. You can also leave us a comment, an email. Email is available at trifles@ihearofsherlock.com. And of course, you have an opportunity to support the show for as little as $1 a month. Check it all out at ihose.co/trifles257. Well, we hate to hear about damsels that are in distress. I mean, we like to hear about damsels in general, and there are plenty of those in the Sherlock Holmes stories. And just as a reminder, we did a series in season 4 of last year where we went through, I guess it was 4 different elements of women in the canon from the Sherlock Holmes Journal, inspired by the Sherlock Holmes Journal. It was a short kind of sideboard on the Sherlock Holmes, Mr. Sherlock Holmes the Theorist episodes. That was our running theme. We did one of the Mr. Sherlock Holmes Theorist episodes every month, and in that case, we looked at the scholarship from the Sherlock Holmes Journal. We looked at the women of influence in episode 185. We looked at the working girls in episode 190. We looked at ladies of title in episode 194, and finally, we looked at the victims in episode 199. We'll have links to all of those episodes available in the show notes, but we did want to call those out because the victims, well, they're women that are a little bit different than what we're categorizing as damsels in distress. Bert, who just a quick rundown, who were some of those victims that we covered, and why are they different than what we're going to talk about today?
Well, when we covered victims in the canon, we touched on some of the people that are familiar names probably to many of our listeners. Kate Whitney from The Twisted Lip, Julia Stoner from The Speckled Band, Nancy DeVoy from Crooked Man, Kitty Winter from The Illustrious Client, Mary Holder, Mrs. Ronder from The Veiled Lodger, Mary Holder from Beryl Coronet, and of course Brenda Tregennis from Devil's Foot. And these are all women who are victims and whose demise and bad treatment features in the world of Sherlock Holmes as a motivating action. But these people are mostly part of the furniture in the story. You know, they're not really central. None of them, for example, were actually clients of Sherlock Holmes. So today we're taking another view, damsels in distress. And it's a great topic because the word that sort of comes out when you tell people about damsels in distress is melodrama. Something sensational, exaggerated characters, exciting events, stories that are intended to appeal to the emotions, and it calls to mind things like the old silent films, Perils of Pauline from 1917. Oh, young Pauline is left with a lot of money when her wealthy uncle dies. And friends, if you haven't seen any of go and look at a silent film. Every so often I come across people who've never seen a silent film. But poor Pauline, her uncle's secretary is her guardian until she marries. And meanwhile, her guardian screams to come up with these constant schemes to bump her off so he can get his hands on her money. And, these are sort of part of melodrama, which has been, one of the great themes and rivers of fiction that's just run for decades. And
I feel like there should be an appearance here somewhere by Snidely Whiplash and Nell and Dudley Do-Right. I'll save you, Nell.
Yeah, C.J. Ward had that same appreciation that Christopher Morley had about melodrama and these old stage plays and so on. And Snidely, for our friend, I'm sure we have listeners who have no idea who we're talking about. Snidely Whiplash was a cartoon villain created by J. Ward in the late 50s and the 1960s for a cartoon series called Rocky and Bullwinkle. And boy, if you haven't seen Snidely Whiplash, please turn us off and go go find.
Why are you wasting our time with us? There's so much better material out there.
Yeah, it's an important part of your cultural education. But a good place to start here is with the Speckled Band. Helen Stoner. Here's a woman who is not part of the furniture. She's the client, so she's at center stage. And like the other characters we just referred to, she's someone who is guaranteed, as she tells Sherlock Holmes, a certain annual sum at the time of her marriage.
Suspicious, that. And of course we have, like Snidely Whiplash, the evil stepfather, Dr. Grimsby Roylott, who kind of rules the household with an iron fist. Very stern fellow. Holmes even pulls Miss Stoner's hand and notes that her wrist has been bruised. And he picks up on this. As much as he picked up on the mud splatters on her dress, he also picked up on these very subtle bruises on her wrist and inferred that her stepfather, and she was shielding the outsized influence her stepfather had on her.
Yeah. And, the scene, the situation, you talk about exaggerated characters, exciting events. There is Helen, her sister's 2 years dead under mysterious circumstances. She's living alone in an uninhabited house with animals, gypsies on the grounds. Her bed is bolted to the floor. And her deranged stepfather, who, by the way, beat his native butler to death and threw a blacksmith off the parapet, in addition to collecting all these lions and tigers and things, oh my, her stepfather is smoking Indian cigars that she can smell.
Yeah, there's no sense of a hookah over there. It was these horrid cigars. And you think that would have been what would have set her off, that something was not right with the setting. But gosh, I mean, everything is pointing in the direction of danger, Will Robinson.
Right. It's a wonderful situation. Notice, by the way, and Holmes, of course, underscores this occasionally in his commentary. He says, when a doctor goes bad, he's the first of villains, and Roylott, worse than Palmer or Pritchard, which are two doctor poisoners. So, Holmes is sort of underscoring this sense of alarm. But notice, by the way, that Helen Stoner, who otherwise seems to be perfectly reasonable and, in fact, praiseworthy as a client, notice, by the way, that she never tells, apparently, her fiancé, Percy Armitage. Now, that's a name. Sounds like Percy Armitage would be of no help, doesn't it? Oh, I must go tell Percy. Never tells him about all this, never escapes to his parents' home. And, it's one of the peculiar things about some of these damsels in distress.
Yeah, and it's interesting, too, because you look at that episode we did about the victims. Helen's sister, Julia, was listed in that victims list. And Helen very much is, I mean, she is being victimized, but she does not allow herself to become a victim. And even though these two women were twins, in any kind of twin situation, you'll certainly have one personality that's a little more dominant than the other, or a little more assertive than the other. And clearly, it's a good thing Julia was taken from us first, because I don't know that she would have come forward and hatched the plan to arrive at Baker Street early in the morning, earlier than her father was heading into the city, and to really take agency for herself. And I think we're going to see that through a couple of other damsels in distress. That the running theme here is they have agency. They may still be victims of the Victorian era and the time in which they live, but they do allow themselves to become more independent, to take certain steps, and to put themselves as damsels in distress into a position where they can be rescued.
Yeah, absolutely right. That's a great point. I never thought about that, but Helen had the advantage of seeing and observing her sister and her sister's experiences, whereas Julia, just sort of encountered this as the eldest. Oh, no, they were twins, weren't they? Twins?
They were twins.
Wait a minute.
Yeah, they were twins.
I always thought that.
Or were they?
No, Julia was going to be married first, and that was like 2 years ago. So,
they weren't having a twin wedding, were they?
I know. I don't recall. I don't think in my head, I don't consider them to be twins,
okay.
Which is not to say that they're not twins in the story.
Well, folks, tell us what. If you have your canon at hand, and we're not going to look it up now, we will leave this up to you. Correct us if we're wrong, or correct me if I'm wrong, correct Bert if he's wrong. Let us know what the status of the Stoner sisters is. Yes. In the meantime, we will give you the status of our sponsor. The Baker Street Journal continues to be the leading Sherlockian publication since its founding in 1946 by Edgar W. Smith. In its pages, you'll find both serious scholarship and articles that play the game. The journal is essential reading for anyone interested in Sherlock Holmes, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and a world where it's always 1895. If you subscribe to the Baker Street Journal, you'll get 4 quarterly issues as well as the Christmas annual. You don't have to be a member of the BSI or of any Sherlockian society for that matter to subscribe to the journal. It's open to anyone who enjoys talking about, reading about, and writing about Sherlock Holmes. And you can also contribute to the BSJ. Your imagination is the only limitation there. So get on the bandwagon and subscribe to the Baker Street Journal this year. Make it an important part of your commitment to the world of Sherlock Holmes. Just go to BakerStreetIrregulars.com and subscribe today.
Excellent. Well, from the speckled band, we move on to the second great damsel in distress, and that's the first of the Violets. That's Violet Hunter. And like Helen Stoner, she too is a client. She's center stage, and she's all alone. And boy, it's from the first moment she sets foot in Baker Street, where Watson says she has the brisk manner of a woman who has had her own way to make in the world. And that so reinforces your comment, your observation a couple of minutes ago about, the determination, the agency of some of these women. And Violet Hunter's been a governess for 5 years, and she's now gone to an employment agency, and there's a whole bunch of odd requirements. This doesn't smell good from the beginning. She's being grossly overpaid, particularly for someone who has only a little French and a little German. And she's being asked to cut her hair, and maybe she'll have to sit here or sit there.
It's funny. I mean, we've seen overpayment of an employee, a signal in previous Sherlock Holmes stories that there is something amiss, that someone came at too high a rate. I think it was Jeffro Rucastle who was paying too much for his assistant at the pawn shop. Oh no, he was coming at half wages. That's what it was. He was willing to work for half wages. And when the criminal offered to work for half wages, that signals something. And now we have someone who is offering double wages, essentially. And again, the red flag goes off. And, it's too bad, because I'm almost tempted to have thought, if this was my first time reading The Copper Beeches, I'm almost tempted to have thought of Jeffro Rucastle as a very liberal employer, someone who was paying a woman for what she was worth that was maybe more than the market value or more than the standard of the time. And yet, that's not what he was at all.
No, and in all the cases of Sherlock Holmes over his 40 years of active practice, we will never meet anyone who matches that description.
No, indeed. And, let's not forget that Jeffro Rucastle, as we come to find out, has numerous familial issues, shall we say.
Yes, absolutely.
His wife, you talk about furniture, his wife almost blended into the wallpaper. She was silent and pale-faced and seemed to have some great sorrow amid her knowledge. And boy, did she ever. He had, there was said he had another daughter who had, quote, gone to Philadelphia, which of course comes into play in our friends, the Copper Beeches of Philadelphia, the Sherlock Holmes Society. And then there's this existing child, Edward, utterly spoiled and ill-natured. He was small with a large head, and he had fits of passion and gloomy sulking, and he loved giving pain to small creatures like birds, and of course the cockroaches, smack, smack, smack. And like he did with animals, Sherlock Holmes deduced that there was something amiss with the family by looking at the behavior of the children. And this, in addition to being, in addition to this family, Violet Hunter was also in the midst of some domestic servant issues. Toller, who was always drunk. Grizzled hair, whiskers, smelled of drink. I mean, not what you really think of as part of the help, at least inside the house.
No, not at all. And of course, Violet Hunter describes the Tollers. She says they were a most unpleasant couple. And then there's all of this stuff, and
we don't have many visitors there at the Copper Beeches.
No, this dress that's been worn before, and then of course there's a point in the case where she is shown by Jeffro Rucastle this small outhouse near the kitchen door where a chain rattles, and she sees two glowing eyes, and that's Carlo the Mastiff. And then later on in an evening, she will actually see it. And she says to Holmes and Watson, as it emerged into the moonshine, I saw what it was. It was a giant dog, as large as a calf, tawny tinted, with a hanging jowl, a black muzzle, huge projecting bones. It walked slowly across the lawn and vanished into the shadow upon the other side. That dreadful sentinel sent a chill to my heart, which I do not think any burglar could have done. I mean, this is a Baskerville-sized hound.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, this is a significant danger, significant distress for this particular damsel. But, you know, one thing popped out as you were just describing the scenario there, Bert. Even more distressful for a young lady of the Victorian era to have a dog like that walking the grounds. I'm thinking about her having to wear used clothing. I mean, if Rucastle really wanted this to come off well, wouldn't he have bought her a new dress or a series of new dresses? I mean, let's think about this for a moment. Young Alice, his locked-up daughter, was that the only dress she owned? Was that the only piece of clothing that her fiancé saw her in? I mean, that couldn't be. The haircut alone and maybe one instance of the dress would have been good, but my goodness, they should have furnished her with a series of dresses to kind of lessen the scrutiny there.
Well, it's a very good idea. I hadn't quite thought about that. Yeah, well.
I mean, if I were holding a woman hostage and having her impersonate my daughter, that's what I would do. But, hey, that's just me.
Well, I'm glad you've thought this through and trying to apply it in your own life. I think that's very encouraging. We all have to learn from these
There
experiences.
You go. There are life lessons in the canon.
Yeah.
Well, who's our final instance here?
Well, but before we get there,
okay.
I just have to say, there is this wonderful wrap up in the story. She goes to this uninhabited wing. I mean, talk about a melodrama, the locked door, this threat, I'll throw you to the mastiff. And then she says when she's back talking to Sherlock Holmes, I remember nothing until I found myself lying on my bed, trembling all over. And I thought of you, Mr. Holmes. I could not live there longer without some advice. I was frightened of the house, of the man, of the woman, of the servants, even of the child. They were all horrible. And if I could only bring you down, all would be well. And then, of course, she decides to send him a wire and she feels better. But it's a lovely little bit of dialogue there where she sort of sums it up. It's sort of the end of Act 2 and you're off to Act 3. And then, of course, the villain, like in The Speckled Band, falls victim to his own evil weapon because the Mastiff winds up seeking out Geoffrey Rucastle.
An appropriate ending at that point. And, interestingly, too, we talk about these women having more agency, being a little more assertive. And we find that Violet Hunter had become the head of a private school in Walsall, where she met with considerable success. So good on you, Violet Hunter.
Yeah. And then in Solitary Cyclist, we have another Violet. And like Violet Hunter, Watson, even though Holmes is busy, Watson says, oh, this young and beautiful woman, tall, graceful, queenly, who presented herself at Baker Street late in the evening and implored his assistance and advice. It was vain to urge that his time was already fully occupied. For the young lady, this is to your point about agency, the young lady had come with the determination to tell her story, and it was evident that nothing short of force could get her out of the room until she had done so, and a bit like,
Julia?
Yes.
Helen Stoner.
Yeah, a bit like Helen, she's to be married at the end of the summer, and off we go.
Yeah, and here she was being victimized or tortured in some way, at least socially tortured by having to be around the odious Mr. Woodley. Mr. Carruthers was there, evidently trying to do his best to protect her, but Mr. Woodley kept coming around, and then all of a sudden she's riding her bicycle from the house to the train and is followed by a mysterious bearded gentleman and feels as if there's some threat there. And one of the wonderful things, again talking about agency, is how she decided to trick the the solitary cyclist following her, picked up her bike, rode right back at him, sending him on a tear in the other direction. So a bold move for a young lady of the era who was feeling threatened of sorts.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is lovely. You know, there's a lot going on there. And of course, Holmes will take, you know, just to make sure we, the reader, haven't missed anything. Holmes will have this little paragraph, you know, at the end of their interview where he sums up all of the strange things. And then there's the denouement, of course, at the end of the case. But here's a case where there's no instrument of murder to be turned back on the criminals. So instead, Watson gives us, you know, this sort of literary fast shuffle. He says, in the next few sentences, he'll sort of wrap everything up. Miss Violet Smith did indeed inherit a large fortune, and she's now the wife of Cyril Morton, the senior partner of this law firm, this famous Westminster electricians. Williamson and Woodley were tried for abduction and assault. This one got 7 years. That one got 10. Bob Carruthers, you know, I'm sure. I don't know what happened to him, Watson says, unusually, but I'm sure, you know, the court didn't consider his assault very gravely. And maybe he served a few months, maybe not, but he was sort of a good guy, you know, and then, and that's it. And then we're out the door.
And we are far less distressed at the end of that, which I would say is just a trifle.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Please join us again next week for another installment of Trifles. Show notes are available on SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and be sure to check out our longer show, I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, where we interview notable Sherlockians and share news of the Sherlockian world.
You've taken my breath away, Mr. Holmes.
A ventilator made, a cord hung, and a woman who lies in the bed dies.